Stanford professor Scott Sagan once said something everyone who follows the economy or investment market should hang on their wall. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. History is mostly the study of surprising events, but it is often used by investors and economists as an unassailable guide to the future. You can see it around you today. People talking about the recession. Has it come yet? Are we in a recession? When is the recession coming? How long is it going to last? What will be the impacts of the recession on the market? Will there be a depression? All these things around you. Now, I am not disagreeing or agreeing with anyone out there. What I'm offering is just a different perspective at it. It is smart to have a deep appreciation for economic and investing history. History helps us calibrate our expectations, study where people tend to go wrong, and offers a rough guide of what tends to work, but it is not in any way a map of the future. Something that many investors today do is that they over-rely on past data as a signal for future conditions in a field where innovation and change are the lifeblood of progress. Now, you can't blame investors for doing this. If you view investing as a hard science, history should be a perfect guide to the future. And if you're a doctor, kidneys operate the same way today as they did in, say, 100 years ago. But investing is not a hard science. It's a massive group of people making imperfect decisions with limited information. And I quote the author of the book Psychology of Money as I say this. Now, Richard Feynman, the great physicist, once said, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings." Well, investors do. Quite a few of them, in fact. That's why it's hard to predict what they'll do next based solely on what they did in the past. The cornerstone of economics is that things change over time because the invisible hand hates anything staying too good or too bad indefinitely. Now, if you don't know what the invisible hand is, a free hand is basically a metaphor for how individuals will act in a free market. The most important driver of anything tied to money is the stories people tell themselves and the preferences they have for goods and services. Those things don't tend to sit still, they change with culture and generation. What you like today might not be what your parents like. People's preferences change, and they always will keep changing. The mental trick we play on ourselves here is an over-admiration of people who have been there, done that when it comes to money. Experiencing specific events does not necessarily qualify you to know what will happen next. Now, two dangerous things happen when you rely too heavily on investment history as a guide to what's going to happen next. First, you'll likely miss the outlier events that move the needle the most. The most important events in historical data are the big outliers. The Great Depression, World War II, the dot-com bubble, September 11th, the housing crash, etc. Now, 15 billion people were born in the 19th and 20th centuries. But try to imagine how different the global economy and the whole world would be if just 4 of them never existed. Adolf Hitler, Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, and Martin Luther King. I'm not even sure that's the most meaningful list, but almost everything about the world today, from borders to technology to social norms, would be different if these people hadn't left their mark. The same goes for projects, innovations, and events. Imagine the last century without the Great Depression, World War II, September 11th, or the fall of the Soviet Union. The thing that makes tail events easy to underappreciate is how easy it is to underestimate how things compound. How, for example, 9/11 prompted the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, which helped drive the housing bubble, which led to the financial crisis, which led to a poor jobs market, and so on. The majority of what's happening at any given moment in the global economy can be tied back to a handful of past events that were nearly impossible to predict. The reason surprises occur is not because our models are wrong or our intelligence is low. It's because the odds that Adolf Hitler's parents argued on the evening 9 months before he was born were the same as them conceiving a child. The problem is that we often use events like the Great Depression and World War II to guide our views of things like worst case scenarios when thinking about future investments. Now, according to the author of the books The Psychology of Money, this is not a failure of analysis, it's a failure of imagination. He says the correct lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising. Now, this is all about the first dangerous thing. Now let's talk about the other one. Now, history can be a misleading guide to the future of the economy and the stock market because it doesn't account for structural changes that are relevant in today's world. Now, consider a few big ones. The 401k is 42 years old. The Roth IRA is younger, created in the 1990s, so personal financial advice and analysis about how Americans save for retirement today is not directly comparable to what made sense just a few generations ago. We have new options, things have changed. Take venture capital for example, it barely existed a few years ago. There are single venture capital funds today that are larger than the entire industry was a generation ago. What this means is that all historical data going back just a few decades about how startups are financed is out of date. Take public markets for example, the S&P 500 did not include financial stocks up until 1976. Today they make up 16% of the index. Technology stocks were virtually non-existent like a few decades ago, but today they are more than a fifth of the index. Accounting rules have also changed over time, so have disclosures, auditing, and the amount of market liquidity. Many investors and economists take comfort in knowing the forecasts are backed up by decades, even centuries of data. But since economies evolve, recent history is often the best guide to the future because it's more likely to include important conditions that are relevant to the future. The world changes, of course it does, and those changes are what matter most over time. That doesn't mean we should ignore history when thinking about money, but there's an important nuance. The further back in history you look, the more general your takeaway should be. General things like people's relationship to greed and fear, how they behave under stress, and how they respond to incentives tend to be stable in time. The history of money is useful for that kind of stuff. But specific trends, specific trades, specific sectors, specific casual relationships about markets, and what people should do with their money are always examples of evolution in progress. So that's all time for this video guys. I hope you enjoyed and tried to understand this different take. I suggest you read the book Psychology of Money, a lot of anecdotes from that book, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like this video if you did, subscribe to the channel, much more interesting videos coming and already on the channel, so check them out, and I'll meet you in the next one.